Watch yourself, Schluff. Dava. Oh, you scared me there. Because it's happened to me once. Trust me, I know about that. Oh, when I was sleeping. Okay. All right. Hopefully, we're not sleeping today. Are we all awake? Let's see. Are we going live? I think we're live now on YouTube. If YouTube caught our banter from before, then we're in big trouble because I don't know what we've been saying, eh? Either way, the discussion that we had yesterday about Eshet Chayil, which I think is a fascinating and important discussion, to know what it means to be a true woman of valor. And I guess you could each look in the mirror, ladies, that is, and think about how that prayer and song and all the insights that we learned in it pertain and are relevant to your own life and how you find it yourself or some other significant ladies in your own life. But the essential identity that we discussed here of the role of a Jewish woman is, besides for we're saying being industrious and resourceful and devoted and committed and generous and God-fearing, all those are beautiful character traits that a fine Yiddish mama has. But what we said, the bottom line is being the nurturer of her family, her community and faith, being the akeres habayis, the mainstay of the home, the foundation pillar, the one who guarantees the continuity of the community. And the classic Eshet Chayil song that we played yesterday, two of them, Hebrew version and an English version, they ascribe all of these wonderful characteristics, the industriousness, the resourcefulness, the devotion, the generosity, fear of God. And what we're going to see today is, as we launch into our story of Doña Gracia, I'm not sure actually how you pronounce her name because it's Spanish from 500 years ago. But either way, Doña Gracia Nasi is a lady who exemplified and personified these character traits. And today we're going to talk about her and how she didn't only care for her own family, where, of course, as we've said many times, charity begins at home, but it doesn't end at home. So it's a fascinating story, and we'll do is as follows. I want to share with you a little bit about where are we? Sorry, this is from yesterday. There we go. Doña Gracia Nasi. I want to first give you a little bit of a brief history about that era and the life then, and maybe to put on a video that can better articulate it than I. So we already did discuss the tragic story of the expulsion and conversion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal in a previous lesson a couple of weeks ago, as you might recall. But for those of you who weren't here then, some of you were on holiday, or for those of you watching this in the future and don't want to go back to an older video, let's quickly review and discuss it, because then we talked in the context of the life of Rabbi Menashe ben Yisrael, who was a Jew who had met with Oliver Cromwell and petitioned and campaigned for the Jews to return to England. That's where we discussed it then. But I want to go into more detail today and talk about the saga in the context of Doña Gracia, because it's important as we tell the story to have a little bit of the background, because I think that's key to us understanding the life and experiences of the protagonist, of the character in our story, Doña Gracia. So let's look back. Who remembers what year was the Spanish Inquisition? 1492. Jews of Spain were presented with really a terrible choice. Either convert to Christianity or leave the country. That was the choice they gave. So what options did they have? You know, it's like you're flying on El Al Airlines. Everyone ever flew El Al recently? And they come around offering glatt kosher dinner. You know what your options are? My friend asked, what are the options? You have vegetarian, you have meat. Stewardess says, your options are yes or no. Speaking of which, right now, there is a kidnapped Swedish girl on an El Al flight. Any of you seen? Young Greta, what's her surname? Anyways, the one making the attention seeker who tried to claim that she was kidnapped. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So where am I going? The options they were given. It reminds me of another old Maisele, just to warm us up a bit. There was an old Jew who moves into this very deeply Christian neighborhood, and everyone there abides by the Catholic rule. There's a homeowners association. You know these things. If you live in certain communities, you have to follow the rules. Listen, we have rules in our communities about an Erev, perhaps. That's not rules. It's a certain. Some places they implement and they enforce rules. And this was a very Christian Catholic neighborhood, and they had a rule: you're not allowed to eat meat on Friday. Good Friday. I don't know what the rule behind it is, but every Erev Shabbos, this Yiddle, he's only Yiddle in the town, but you have to have a nice Shabbos meal. And if you know, at least if you come to my house, and I'm sure your homes too, what it's like on a Friday afternoon with the soup and the kugel and the chalent and all the main course and the other course, right? There's good food cooking. And this Yiddle, he lights up his grill. He's cooking up a whole Shabbos meal, chicken and ribs and chalent and tzimis. And his neighbors don't like the smell of the flesh. It's not, what's the word, gelling very well for them. You just imagine the delicious smell of the flesh, of the meat, it's permeating the neighborhood, and it overwhelms the Catholic community. So they hold an emergency homeowners association meeting, and they convince the local priest that he has to give this Jew an ultimatum. It's almost like a inquisition. They said either he converts and only eats parv, and I guess he could eat dairy, maybe fish on a Friday, or he has to move out of the town. That's the ultimatum they gave him. So the Jew thinks about this. He says, you know what, I'll convert. Maybe he wasn't serious. So he's brought to the church, and what do? In front of the whole community, they have a whole spiel, and the priest sprinkles some water on him 3 times on his head and tells him, born a Jew, raised a Jew, now a goy. Now you're a Catholic. Okay? That Friday, what's going on in the town? Once again, there's this tantalizing aroma from a braai, or the chalent, the ribs, the steak, the kishke, the tzimis. It's wafting through the neighborhood again. People can't believe it. What's going on? Vos kum tafar. I don't know how the Christians say vos kum tafar, but within minutes, the priest, followed by a whole angry mob, they storm into this Yid's yard. They start screaming at him, what are you doing? What do you think? You made an agreement. You made a pact with us. Didn't you tell you Catholics are forbidden to eat meat on Fridays? What are you doing here? Yiddle looks at them and says, what are you talking about? What meat? Where do you see meat? This isn't meat. This is fish. I look at him and say, are you crazy? This is fish. Where do you come up with this from? Everyone sees clearly. We see ribs. We see steak. We see flanken. We see ribeye, we see chicken, we see all this stuff in your kitchen. What's going on here? The Jew looks at them and says, I don't know what you're talking about. He picks up a bottle of water. He puts some into his hand. He starts sprinkling it on the grill, and he pours it over the chicken and the meat and the kebabs and the kishke. And he says, born meat, raised meat, now fish. Thank you, Jill. It's an oldie. All right. Reminds me of the rabbi and the priest were having a discussion. And the rabbi said, tell me, is it possible for you to get promoted? You know, I could start off as a rabbi in a little Chabad house. Now they want you at Great Park, at Waverly, at Santon, at Links, you know, one of the big shuls. So the priest says, of course you could get upgraded. You could get promoted. One day he says, I hope to become a bishop. And then the rabbi asks him, what's after bishop? He said, if I do a good job, maybe I'll get promoted to become a cardinal. Okay, that's quite impressive. The rabbi strokes his beard and he says, what's next after cardinal? He says, well, I suppose I could become maybe the Pope. And then what's next? The rabbi asks him. And the priest says, what else could I possibly become? God himself? And the rabbi looks and says, why not? One of our boys made it. No? All right, now that we warmed up a bit, if you got any better jokes, mine don't get any better than that. The story goes, back in Spain, 1492, they were given this ultimatum. Either you convert to Christianity or you leave the country. Many Jews considered it too difficult to leave the country. It wasn't an easy thing to leave everything to leave your lifestyle, to leave your community, to leave your business, to leave your family, not only in Spain. I look at my own family in the 1930s. My mother's parents, who were living in Poland wasn't Germany or Austria, and they saw the tide. They saw what was going on. In general, life wasn't so like in Poland already for some time. I was at the Holocaust Museum in Durban last week, and I think it said there were 3 million Jews living in Poland before the war. There were 18 million Jews in the world in the 1930s. We haven't yet even caught up. And the majority, about 16 million Jews, lived where? In Europe. 16 million Jews lived in Europe. You have countries like Russia and Poland that had millions of Jews. Poland had 3 million Jews living there. About 3 million Jews lived in Poland before the Holocaust. And my mother's parents, I think her mother came from a family of 13. They decided they're going to leave, a bunch of them. And they came to Israel. I mean, it wasn't called Israel at the time. It was British Mandate Palestine, a name that was created to mock us by the Romans. But either way, that's where they moved to. They wanted to go home. Well, what did they keep telling us in Poland those days? Go back to Palestine. Yeah, so we went back home. But many of them couldn't stay there. It was hard. They missed life in Poland. They missed the familiarity. Israel wasn't as developed as it is today. 1930s, 90 years ago, there was malaria, there was overgrown lands, there wasn't, things were just built, chop, plop, it was chalutzim, there were pioneers. It wasn't an easy place to be. And many of them left, they went back to Poland. Many of them never even left Poland. It was difficult. I have my little grocery store. I have my little cart. I'm going to go to South Africa, go to Israel, go to America. People were afraid to leave their comfort zone, their familiarity, what they had. So just putting it into context, even today, although today immigration from South Africa, from our community is staggering. It's oftentimes hard for me to believe that people could give up and could move on. But it's probably easier today than it was in the past. But if I think of the comfort and luxury that we live with here, at least my own family, you wouldn't get that in New York. We live in an acre home here, and it's comfortable and it's spacious. Okay, it's a little bit cold. That's South African winter, not very well insulated in our homes. But you can't replace that easily in Israel. But I guess there's a different quality of life that you could replace it with in Israel. And that's what people go there for. Either way, they were given this ultimatum: convert to Christianity or leave the country. And while many Jews did leave everything behind, their business, oftentimes their families, for those who didn't want to go, and whatever else, but they put their Judaism first and foremost. Some did not go. Some felt that it was too difficult for them to leave, that hundreds of years of history and business and whatever else it was. So some of them chose Christianity. But it was deceptive, because at heart, a Jew never wants to give up their Judaism. And hundreds of thousands of Jews did give up, because when they couldn't leave anymore, when the borders were closed, many of them were murdered. Many of them were killed at the stake. But those who pretended to be Christians, many of them led a hidden Jewish life, and they were known as Marranos, which means, what does Marrano mean? Pig. It's a Spanish word for pig. Yes, many of them were forced. It was not a voluntary conversion. They couldn't leave. Maybe they had an elderly mother who they didn't want to abandon. Think about, practically speaking, not everyone who converted to Christianity then, in fact, most probably did not want to convert. They were compelled, they were forced to. So many of them, just think about circumstances. I made it sound so simple that you don't want to leave your little business. But what if they had an ailing parent? What if they had a child who wasn't well? What if, who knows? You could all think of other good reasons. Working with elderly, I see in many of the retirement homes, many senior citizens who don't have their children around. Many of them, their children have moved on to other pastures. I can't say greener because I think it's pretty green here, but many think otherwise. But I see many senior citizens who have no family here. And others who said, I'm not going to leave my family behind. Okay, personal choices. Anyways, there were, to just understand life in Spain, it didn't just happen one day that there was an Inquisition. There were pogroms, okay? There was the books of Jewish literature that discuss it, talks about Gzeira Skina. There were crusades before that. There were other onslaughts, riots, hatred perpetrated against the Jewish community in Spain. So Jews in Spain knew they weren't welcome and weren't comfortable to be there. Just as in Eastern Europe, or much of Europe, for much of history. I mean, Spain is part of Europe, but Jews were not made to be comfortable there. Many Jews converted to Christianity just to save their lives and their money because they just felt it was too dangerous for their kids, for their family to be known as Jews and to endure and experience all this animosity, hatred, persecution. And in fact, there was a direct line of pogroms that started in the 1390s and culminated with the expulsion in the 1490s. It was a whole century. And the whole justification of the expulsion order against all the Jews was that the Jews were being a negative influence on their brethren that had converted. They were called, the Spanish called them the new Christians. So they didn't even fully embrace, right? They called them Marranos, pigs, but they felt that these Marranos weren't properly converting and assimilating into the Spanish society, which is why ultimately they felt only an expulsion would work, that either expel all Jews or they properly convert, but they wouldn't tolerate any form of Jewish life and practice and observance to be experienced in Spain. And many of those who had heroically left, chose to leave, think about what you left behind. Some of them had to leave an ailing parent behind. Some of them had to leave a flourishing, prosperous business behind. And it's very different than today. Today, many people live in places and can have their business somewhere else. I know some young guys in this community who do very, very well financially. Their business is based in America. So they're earning in dollars or in Europe, in euros and pounds, and they're living here in rands. Now that's a good chap, eh? They have Amazon stores in America. There's a family I know, they actually left eventually, but they had a good business there. They didn't even have any merchandise in their hands. They were like real estate agents, but they were the agents. They had a website. They were middlemen. They had a supplier, a manufacturer. They didn't own stock. They didn't handle it. They just had a good website on which they processed orders, and they earned in dollars, spent in rands. Good deal, eh? Not a bad way to do it. But in those days, you didn't have that option. You didn't even have a central banking system yet. And as we'll go into this story, we'll see more about that. But I think it's important for us to get a perspective and understanding in order to put things into context of appreciating when somebody left their home in Spain, they left everything behind to try to reestablish your life somewhere else. You don't know, it's uncertain. There's what danger lies ahead, and settling your family somewhere else and not even having currency. And the Spaniards didn't let them take anything with them. They had to leave everything behind. Not an easy feat. But some people have managed. Even Nady Kirsch, when he left South Africa, okay, he had good experience, but he left here with very little money in his pocket, according to his story. Came to America with an astute mind. He was able to become a multi-billionaire. But it takes that mind, it takes that resilience, that strength. Most of these exiles who left Spain at the time, you think about, where do people go from South Africa today? Well, people are going to, you have options of places to go. Where do you go to? People go to America, to Australia, Canada, Israel, England. While people did go to many other countries, but what was the most popular place for Spanish Marranos, exiliarchs, whatever you want to call them? There must be a word, refugees, Jewish refugees to go to? Portugal. Very good. Think about going from South Africa, instead of to a foreign country, go somewhere neighboring. Go to Botswana. Why schlep so far? Maybe it's not a bad idea to start a nice community in Botswana. I had a Shabbos, we had a visitor last Shabbos from Botswana. Actually, he's from England, but he's currently doing business in Botswana. And he told me there's actually a sizable Jewish community in Botswana. It's time for a Chabad. Time to open a shul there. Would you believe it? In, what do they call it? Gaborone? That he drove from there. He was supposed to fly back to England, and he couldn't make it in time for Shabbos. So he came to us. Called me up Friday morning. He said, I'm stuck. I need a place for Shabbos. Sure, come to us. And he told me that there's a sizable community there. Lesotho. Any Jews in Lesotho? Where's Livingston? No? Botswana, I don't know how many. Zambia has a Chabad and a strong, nice Jewish community. Zimbabwe has a dwindling Jewish community, but there's a few hundred Jews still there. So think about going to one of these countries instead of further away. Nobody thinks about it because it's probably not worthwhile if you're going to schlep today. But in those days, many of the people chose, instead of going to a foreign country, many of them went to a neighboring country, to Portugal. Just think about it. The language, the culture, the mentality in Portugal, it was all similar to Spain. And the travel didn't require this whole treacherous journey. So it made sense. It was a logical choice at the time. But that turned out to be a disastrous decision. Why was that? Because, as we know, while Portugal did not yet have an inquisition, it came not long later. And I'm going to put up a text here from one of the people who we're reading about, Shmuel Usk. I don't know too much. I didn't get a chance to read that much about his personal life, but his name indicates that he came from a particular region in Spain, which had a similar name, Usk. And after the expulsion of 1492, based on his writings, we see that he and his family were one of those that, instead of going to Turkey or Amsterdam, they chose to go to Portugal. Shmuel wrote about his experiences of the Spanish and Portuguese exiles in his Portuguese language book called Consolation for the Tribulations of Israel. It's written in Spanish, but you could get a translated edition. I first put up the Spanish version, and then I put up the English version. We'll watch the video after. So here we have the Spanish expulsion of 1492. Many of the Jews flee to Portugal, okay? And he, as an example, did not stay in Portugal after. He eventually moves to Italy, because Portugal, we know that in 1497, only 5 years later, implemented their own inquisition. But it's a very interesting story, because Portugal was very happy to embrace and accept Jewish talent. Here you got people who are smart and clever in business. You got doctors and lawyers and accountants and bankers and all kinds of professions and brilliance, and Jews were educated. So it seemed like a good deal to, absorb all these refugees, right? It seemed like the right smart move to make. But as we'll see soon in the texts, I'm going to leave it for the text, that there was an alliance that was between Spain and Portugal. And so that alliance is something that prevented Portugal from, or should I say that made them implement this Inquisition that they originally promised not to. Portugal, in fact, incentivized Jews to move there. And this Shmuel writes in his book, he describes how what his life was like, his memories from his family, his community. And he actually employs a metaphoric kind of writing, as we'll see, of like Yaakov Avinu, our forefather, Yaakov. And he says, when Yaakov says me, it means the people of Israel, Yaakov's other name, right? And when he says my children, it refers to who? To the Jewish nation. So let's look at this. I'll put those slides up in a moment. Hold on. I want to first read, and then we'll put the slides up. Okay, this is blocking, so let's stick it at the bottom. Good. Let's start here. So here is in his book, page 200, he says, of those who were rejected from the Spanish kingdom and who remained faithful to Judaism, the majority, according to him, went to Portugal. I didn't know that. I thought the majority went to other places. So this was interesting to me. Then he says, King John II promised to allow them to live in their religion and to provide ships for those who wish to leave. So he was incentivizing that Jews should come to his land, to Portugal. Now, this King John, they pronounce him as João or something in Portuguese. Did he keep his word? No, because we know that 5 years later, he himself implemented a inquisition. Okay, and he actually kidnapped Jewish children from their parents. I don't know why, if they needed more of a population. So you think about how many more Jews there could have been in the world today, if not for so many, if not for crusades and murders and expulsions and pogroms and all these things that have happened. We haven't even caught up to pre-Holocaust days, let alone the murder and the kidnap. And who knows, we don't know, people who live in the Iberian Peninsula, how many of them descend from Jews. We really don't know, okay? It's crazy. One of the stories I was reading was that many of these children that they kidnapped, they exiled them to settle on an island in Portugal, or Portuguese island, called Sao Tome. And this island was infested with crocodiles. And many of these children died either from disease or from the crocodiles. So just to imagine what they endured. We don't, unless you read these stories, it's not known so much of our history, which is why we chose to do this course now, to better familiarize ourselves with a little bit of our people's history. Of course, the theme this week is for us to understand, but we're only going to get to that part tomorrow. Today's more of the historical context, and tomorrow we'll get to the protagonist, the character, the main character of our story, Doña, Gracia, Nasi. But I really want, I feel, at least for me, it's important to fill in the context of what we're talking about. And King John, besides for kidnapping all these kids, he didn't keep his word. Okay, so he first promised the Jews, come and we'll give you freedom and liberty, but that didn't work. He died in 1495, and he was succeeded by his cousin, King Manuel. Now, you might be familiar with King Manuel. King Manuel is a very interesting story. So let's read it here as described. It's in that book. I just made it smaller up there because we had it in the previous page, and it's a longer text. But let's read it because it fills in the context. Once King Manuel obtained the crown, he did not wait long to torment me. This is being written by Shmuel Usk, who was a Jew living at the time, describing this in his story. He soon proclaimed that all Jews in his kingdom must become Christians or leave Portugal within a stipulated period. But the plot twists further. This proclamation greatly saddened all my children. Again, when he says my children, it seems he's not only referring to his own biological children, but in general, the Jewish community. He was somewhat of a leader in the community. For their hearts told them that my enemy wished to perpetrate an evil greater than exile, and they determined to leave. Since they had lost their lands, they gathered the rest of their belongings as best as they could in this short time and prepared to leave. But when the king realized the Jews' resolve and how little they seemed to mind exile in preference to changing their religion, he revealed his evil intent. He commanded all Jews in the kingdom to assemble in Lisbon, brooding or spreading reports that he would there provide them with ships. But as soon as he gathered them, he had them herded into large buildings called os estaios. Anyone know what os estaios means? I don't know. Was it? Yeah. Okay, I don't either know what it means, but I understand it was some kind of a palace that became the seat of the Portuguese Inquisition. That's where the Portuguese Inquisition was executed. And when he had corralled them like sheep prepared for the slaughter, he at last exposed his venomous character and announced that all were to become Christians and that they should do so out of love, what they would otherwise have to do by compulsion. See his words. These threats were not sufficient to make my children turn their backs to their God. Instead, they answered resolutely that they would not comply with his request. Remember, the people who didn't mind converting to Christianity stayed behind in Spain. So these were Jews who were more determined to keep their religious commitment to Judaism, right? So this is a different caliber of Jew who came to Portugal. So here, Shmuel Usk is relating, and if you read further, he describes how they tore Jewish children away from their parents and they tried to convince them to convert. Don't listen to your old-fashioned, outdated parents, And when they realized they wouldn't succeed, that these kids were I don't want to say brainwashed, but were well educated and were strongly founded in their Judaism, they forcibly converted the children, and they placed them in the custody of Christian families so that these children would be indoctrinated and immediately immersed in Christian society. And these children basically were completely separated from their parents, the only way to compel them to actually convert. Finally, the king commanded that food and drink be withheld from them for 3 days to try them with anguish of hunger. But this they likewise courageously endured. The king realized that even this was insufficient to change them, and that if he starved them any longer, they would perish. So here he's describing the torture that these Jews were subjected to. Think about it. He describes how some Jews committed suicide to avoid being forcibly converted. They rather end their life, which is called being a martyr, dying al Kiddush Hashem. Dragging some by their legs and others by their hair and beards, punching and mauling them, his men brought them to the churches where the waters of baptism were thrown upon them. As a result of this violence, contrary to divine and human laws, the bodies of many Jews were made Christian, but no stain ever touched their souls. Instead, they kept forever impressed upon them the seal of the ancient law. So as we see here, this an interesting description of what these Jews had to endure, what they experienced, what they went through. And King Manuel's expulsion decree officially gave the Jews the option of leaving, but he didn't actually want to lose these, what would you say, productive and valuable citizens of society. So even worse than the Spanish Inquisition, where they said, okay, you want to practice your religion? No problem. Leave our country. You have to leave your possessions behind, but go. Here, he wouldn't even let them leave. And he forcibly converted them, right? He lured them to the port city of Lisbon, where ostensibly they'd be able to board the ships on their journey to the next exile to wherever they would go. But then he rounded them up and forcibly baptized them, forced them into this conversion. Now, when you read about it, actually, there were some Jews who did manage to leave, maybe before he got tough on them and realized he was losing his economy that he didn't want to lose. But interestingly, what I was reading is some of the people he let go, believe it or not, were the rabbis, the spiritual leaders of the community. And why do you think that was? First, I was wondering, why would he be nice to the rabbis? Huh? Well, if you think about it this way, the king wanted to ensure that any remaining conversos wouldn't have that spiritual leadership and guidance that would prevent them. So if you let the rabbis go, who's going to be able to inspire the community and ensure that they continued a religious lifestyle? And that religious lifeline, that they would be connected to the rabbis still, he amputated, he terminated that, and thereby ensured that without the spiritual guidance and leadership of the rabbis, and I guess the Rebbitzins, he felt that was a sure way to end their Jewish practice. And I guess for many it worked. But one of the works I was reading, Rabbi Avram Saba, he describes how his two children were kidnapped from him, and his kids were forcibly converted to Christianity. And he also lost the original drafts of his own books, his Farim, that he had written at the time. He was imprisoned in Portugal and eventually was allowed to leave, and he traveled to Morocco. Hence, you have a tremendous Sephardic community in Morocco, even though Morocco is not inherently Sephardic. Sephardic means Spanish. But that's why you have such a big Sephardic community there, because many of the people went from there to Morocco, where they were able to live more freely. And it is true that in Arabic countries, we didn't have freedom, we were dhimmis. Dhimmis means second-class, inferior citizens. But it is true that for some time, Jews lived more comfortably in Arabic lands than we did in Christian countries. So even in Christian countries, we were tortured, we were persecuted. In Arab countries, Muslim countries, we were second-class citizens, but at least we were able to live. I didn't see it mentioned here, so I guess it must have been in the book that I read. But why did King Manuel, or first King John, why did they change their mind? So King John thought it would be a good opportunity to have Jews in his country for economic reasons. Manuel, who also wasn't as anti-Semitic and wasn't as much of a hater of Jews yet, he was in love with, and I guess you look at the alliances of those days, with the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. And Queen Isabella said, "You will not have my daughter's hand in marriage unless you expel or forcibly convert all your Jews." So Queen Isabella was that vicious woman who really had no tolerance for Jews or Judaism. And she was the one who instigated that King Manuel has to do this in order to marry her daughter. So that's another reason for this shift, that it's very, very interesting. Here you have the Jews who were forced to convert in Spain, and they decided in that terrible choice to leave the country. And the next place they go to, they're forced in the same way, once again, into the same story. And, it was very hard for many to once again have to endure the same hardship. So that's what happens here. And that's how they wind up going from one country to the next. And that's another interesting part of this whole story. So it's a fascinating story. Let me continue here, since there's a lot more to read about and to discuss. Many of them, you think about what they left behind, but those who stayed behind, again, I'm depicting those who stayed behind were the less committed Jews. Those who were more committed tried to leave, or were, what should I say? They not only they try to leave, either they ended their lives, or they ended their lives, or they put up a fight. It wasn't something simple. You didn't just abandon your Judaism. So it's very important to realize that. Many of those who did stay behind, the new converts in Portugal, they were a different breed. These were the people who sacrificed everything to live as Jews. And now they were forcibly converted against their will, which is why they wind up staying in Portugal, but that wasn't their plan. And as a group, the Portuguese Marranos, conversos, they were hardier, more tenacious in their attempt to observe a lot of their Judaism as possible. Because remember, these are not the ones who wanted to convert. These are the ones who converted against their will. And he describes Shmuel Usk, he says, no stain ever touched their souls. Let me put that up here. No stain ever touched their souls. They kept forever impressed upon them the seal of their ancient law. Just very, very interesting to see what that was like and how they, kept their Yiddishkeit alive. I have a chart, but I'm not going to put it up here today. Maybe put it into the next set of slides of the family tree before we go into the story of Doña Gracia. So perhaps we should watch a video now that will give you a little bit more into the story of Doña. And with this background story of who Doña was and the background of her history, then we could launch into understanding and appreciating what she did and learning about a great Jewish woman who heroically saved many lives in her time. So we'll get to that. I just want to point out something else here. As I was preparing for this lesson, I see a lot of names intermingled, Christian-sounding names, Beatrice de Luna, Francisco Mendez. You'll see all these interesting names. And why is that? Because when they were forced to convert to Christianity, it was imposed upon them these Christian or Spanish Christian names. When they finally reach freedom, eventually, they re-embrace their Jewish names. So it's interchanged even within the texts, I guess referring to different eras of their life. And just bear that in mind as we watch the video. I don't know if the video actually discusses that much, but just from the text that we're going to be reading. So let me just put this back up here for you. We'll watch the video and we'll continue our discussion.
They of America, my one brother, he is one still the Jews. Everybody else has got girlfriends, no more Jews. So
it's a fascinating observation.
They all of us used to live very short, they don't how well.
Well, that's why we have Chabad around the world today, because once upon a time, you could say a century or so ago, Jews were being persecuted and we were being assimilated out of hate. You wanted to save your life. You didn't want to be the hated Jew. Today, we have freedom, liberty, democracy in so many countries. And unfortunately, Jews are falling out of Judaism because we have freedom of religion and people are choosing instead freedom from religion. Thank you.
She's beautiful. When I was, when this happened, that's it. That's when we lost it. You have put something into me. And but it's something better.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you.
I think it's easy.
Yeah.
strategy. I
Sydney, we want to watch the video. People online can't hear much, so we'll talk about it. But it's fascinating points. Yes. Yeah.
All the Chabad houses in Iran, Syria.
Good.
Because I know they're Jews there.
Good question. So Iran has a flourishing Jewish community. I don't know how many are there today. When I was in Yeshiva University, which is over 20 years ago, not over 20 years, about 20 years ago. Okay? I was a student at Yeshiva University, and I had a classmate from Tehran, and he told me then, 20 years ago, that there were about 25,000 Jews in Iran. I don't know if it's as many still, or if it's grown or dwindled. I think it's gotten less. But there is a significant Jewish community in Iran. Many of them, unfortunately, again, under duress, they are compelled to pay lip service to the Ayatollah, and at least publicly they have to condemn Israel, or else they're considered pariahs, and they have a hard time. Many of them do support Israel, but can't do so publicly. The chief rabbi of Iran is a quasi-Chabadnik. He comes to the Kinnis HaShluchim every year. I always see him at the Chabad Rabbis Conference. Does he have to speak from two sides of his mouth? Yes. When he sits with us at the conference, he tells us one thing. When you watch him on TV talking in Tehran, he says something else. And he tells us, in his position, which is monitored by the government, he has to condemn Israel. So in Iran, you definitely have a very strong Chabad influence. Before the fall of the Shah, there was a Chabad presence there, not a permanent per se, it wasn't a Chabad house, but Chabad Shluchim used to visit Iran back then. And you had Bachram going there. Today, at least it's not public knowledge. I guess like in Dubai, there was a Chabad presence in Dubai long before the Abraham Accords. There was a Chabad house, a clandestine Chabad house, 10 years. 2010, Chabad already had a full-time presence. A Chabad house opened in Dubai in 2010. Abraham Accords only came in 2020. In the 1970s, you had an open Chabad presence. Chabad Shluchim would visit. Chabad houses weren't as big of a deal yet in the 1970s. You know, they were just starting in the 50s. What, you know, today, it's like a given. You got a Chabad everywhere. But back in the day, the Rebbe would send Shluchim, and they didn't have to open a Chabad house per se. The Chabad influence was there. Chabad was very instrumental in saving hundreds, maybe even thousands of Iranian Jews in the late 70s, early 80s. And many of them, many Iranian, Persian Chabad rabbis around the world today. So that's in regards to Iran. Syria, I recently saw Chabadniks in Syria visiting the few Jews there, going to the grave sites. There's many dead Jews, more dead Jews in Syria than living ones. Many grave sites of Jews. I'm not only talking about Eli Cohen kind of, people who were more recently captured there, but there definitely isn't today a Chabad house in Iran, in Syria. I don't think there ever was an official Chabad there. But one of the major influences on Chabad was Rabbi Chaim Vital. If you study Tanya, you will see many of his teachings brought in the Tanya. He was a student of the Arizal, talking a few hundred years ago. And he is buried in Syria. Okay, there were many great rabbis and flourishing Jewish community once upon a time in Syria. Talked about Iraq. Iraq, once upon a time, had the largest Jewish community outside of Israel for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. Okay, Jews have been in Iraq since the destruction of the first temple, when Nebuchadnezzar, who was the king of Iraq, of Babel, brought the exiles there. And many of those Jews never went back to Israel. They stayed in Iraq. They would go on pilgrimages. The whole Talmud, if you go back to our previous course before Pesach, was formulated where? In Iraq. Now, in 2001, after the attacks on the Twin Towers, President Bush went to attack Iraq because of the weapons of mass destruction and the story there with Saddam Hussein. Whether or not there were weapons of mass destruction or it was just a smokescreen, Saddam certainly attacked Israel and definitely caused a lot of havoc. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are against Bush because they say they never found the weapons of mass destruction. But there's no doubt that Saddam Hussein himself was a danger to the world. Two of my classmates, both Chabadniks, were in Iraq. and there were many other Jewish soldiers there. And one of them read the Megillah, and they did Muftzayim and other soldiers. So an official Chabad presence, I don't think there ever was in Iraq. But long before Chabad existed, you had the Talmud in Iraq. Today, there's not very many Jews left there. The few Jews left in Iraq, I don't think there's very many Iraqi Jews. And if there are Iraqi Jews, they're not publicly proclaiming so. But the Jews you do have in Iraq today are A, probably US military personnel. B, I did see there's a guy, I'm forgetting his name, but he's a popular social media activist. And he's not an activist, sorry, I'll take it back. He's a young kid. He's probably in his young 30s or late 20s. And he travels the whole world. And he does taste testing, but he's a proud Jew. And he's gone to Iraq. He's done videos there, and he shows you the food and not kosher, unfortunately, but he shows you what life is like, and he meets with people, and it's no secret that he's Jewish. And he's there, and he talks about life in Iraq, and he says they're very hospitable and kind. But I don't know if they don't know that he's Jewish or not, or what, but it's just interesting. Yeah. Svimar, the mechanic, yeah. Isn't he from Syria, his family? Oh, from Iraq, okay. Yeah. Yeah. When people talk about genocides and expulsions, while it's true that in 1948, 700,000 of the Muslims who lived in Israel had left or ran or were chased or whatever it was. And it was a war. You know, in a war, you're going to get your enemy out. How many more Jews were expelled from their Arab countries and couldn't take a thing with them? Oh, he has that clock. Beautiful. Oh, a plaque. Yeah, excuse my American accent. Plock. Plock or plaque? All right. Yeah. Yes, Sydney.
You provide this. You have given humans away. You have given me something, not only to come here for a meal, but you have to sit and listen to you. You come underneath. You can feel okay. You know? And where I come from is your bar mitzvah day, you preach.
You know, there's an old joke. They say that the other ministers came to the rabbi. They said, we checked the shul and we don't see any mice or rats, but in their place of worship, they have too many. So they asked the rabbi, what's your trick? How do you get rid of the rodents? So the rabbi says, look, I have a trick, but it only works in shuls. It's not going to work in a mosque or church. Please tell us. It's okay if you insist. He says, once a year, I gather all the mice. I put in them a yarmulke and a talus. I say, today you're bar mitzvah. And guess what? They never, ever come back again. Okay, jokes aside, I actually got to go shortly. So let's end with this video, and we'll continue tomorrow this discussion, unless we should leave the video for tomorrow too and start with an interesting video tomorrow and continue the discussion from there. How about that? Okay, enjoy lunch, ladies and gents. Is there beating today? Don't beat anyone up, but if anyone wants to join the Will Work, please make sure to speak to the Rebbitzin. It's only in person, not virtually, but speak to the Rebbitzin and you can join the Will Works. Raz, want to say something before we end?
No, goodbye, and please God, I'll see you in Mitzvah Hashem in 2 weeks' time. We leave tomorrow morning for
Looking
Israel.
forward. Well, watch us on the plane or in Israel. Now, enjoy every moment in Israel. And I need a full report because I'm going, please God, in next month or the month after. So I'm going to make an appeal now. If anybody wants to send anything to Israel, I'm happy to bring. I mean, depending on size. I have 2 weddings coming up in August. I just have to figure out if I could convince them. One, it came first. It's on the 10th of August. And my nephew wants to get married on the 31st. I can't see how I'm going to do both. But the 10th of August, I'm officiating the wedding. So I can't miss that one. They already want me to book my ticket. I'm waiting for my nephew to finalize his wedding date. Otherwise, I don't know how we're going to do it. Bring everyone with? What's that?
Just a word
Go
of
for a whole
advice.
month. Yes.
My word
What's your word of
of
advice?
If you're flying Kenyan Airlines and via Addis, go straight to
Kenyan.
Kenyan. Don't go through any travel agent or travel
Oh,
operative.
you mean Ethiopian? Let me tell you where I'm finding better deals. I'm finding a better deal right now on Etihad, and it's a nicer line. And you even get to get 2 nights free hotel, which I'm not going to take up because I don't need to go to Abu Dhabi. But on Etihad, same price right now as on Ethiopian. It's a nicer airline, and you even get up to 2 free nights stay in a hotel in Abu Dhabi. So if anyone's done that, let me know. Maybe before I book my ticket, if it's worthwhile to do that, one or 2 nights in Abu. Maybe I would do 1 night in Abu Dhabi.
Do it. Don't
No,
trust
get
Ethiopia.
through an agent, go directly through the airline.
Directly. Don't go through an operative.
Oh, things change. Okay. Good to know that. Yeah, I've flown Ethiopia many times. I prefer a different carrier if possible.
Yeah.
Okay, Zach, everyone. See you tomorrow.